The fog rolled in from the sea like a living thing, thick and unyielding, swallowing the coastal cliffs whole. Mia leaned against the railing of the old lighthouse keeper's cottage, her breath visible in the chill evening air. The waves crashed below, a rhythmic roar that matched the unease twisting in her stomach. She'd rented this place for a week, a much-needed escape from the suffocating routine of her life back in the city. Her sister Lena was supposed to join her tomorrow, armed with wine, old photo albums, and the kind of sisterly banter that could chase away any shadow. But tonight Mia was alone, or so she thought. She checked her phone for the umpteenth time. No signal bars flickered to life. The isolation was complete. The cottage was a relic from another era, with creaking wooden floors, a stone fireplace that begged for a fire, and windows that rattled against the wind. Mia had lit a few candles, their flames dancing uncertainly, casting elongated shadows that made the room feel alive with secrets. She poured herself a cup of herbal tea, the steam rising like a ghost, and settled into an armchair by the hearth. The book in her lap, a thriller about hidden identities, remained unopened. Her mind wandered instead to her fiancé Jordan back home. Their engagement had been a whirlwind of excitement 2 years ago, but lately it felt like a script they were both reading from memory. "Take the time you need," he'd said, kissing her forehead with that familiar, dutiful affection. Mia had nodded, ignoring the hollow echo in his voice. A knock at the door jolted her from her thoughts. It was sharp, insistent, cutting through the wind's howl. Mia froze, her heart pounding. Who could it be? The nearest town was miles away, and no one knew she was here except Lena and Jordan. She approached the door cautiously, peering through the small peephole. A figure stood there, shrouded in a hooded raincoat, water streaming off it like tears. "Hello?" Mia called, her voice steadier than she felt. The door muffled the response, but it sounded like, "Lena sent me." Mia hesitated, then unlatched the bolt. The man who stepped inside was tall, with wind-swept dark hair and eyes the color of storm clouds. He shook off the rain, revealing a face etched with lines that spoke of years spent outdoors, perhaps sailing or hiking, something rugged and untamed. "I'm Reese," he said, extending a hand that was calloused and warm despite the cold. "Lena's colleague from the gallery. She got stuck in traffic, some accident on the highway, and asked me to check on you. Said you might need company until she arrives tomorrow." Mia blinked, processing. Lena worked at an art gallery in the city. Mia vaguely remembered her mentioning a Reese, a photographer who specialized in seascapes. "Oh, right. Come in. You're soaked." She stepped aside, feeling a mix of relief and awkwardness. Reese peeled off his coat, hanging it by the door, revealing a simple sweater and jeans that clung slightly from the damp. He carried a backpack from which he pulled a bottle of red wine. "Peace offering," he said with a wry smile. "Lena said you like Cabernet." They settled by the fire, Mia stoking it higher to ward off the chill. The wine flowed easily, loosening the tension. Reese talked about his work, capturing the raw beauty of the ocean, the way light fractured on waves during a storm. "It's unpredictable," he said, his voice deep and measured. "One moment calm, the next, chaos." Mia found herself drawn in, sharing stories of her own job as a graphic designer, the endless deadlines that left her feeling like a cog in a machine. "Jordan thinks stability is everything," she admitted after her second glass. "But sometimes it feels like we're just coasting." Reese leaned forward, his gaze intent but not prying. "Coasting can be safe, but it doesn't feed the soul." The words hung in the air, simple yet profound. Outside, the foghorn from the lighthouse wailed, a lonely sentinel in the night. Mia glanced at the clock, barely 9 p.m. The evening stretched before them like an uncharted path. As the hours ticked by, the conversation deepened. Reese shared tales of his travels, a solo trek through the Scottish Highlands, where he'd nearly lost his way in a blizzard, only to find shelter in a remote bothy. "It taught me that getting lost isn't always a bad thing," he said. "Sometimes it's how you find what you really need." Mia opened up about her doubts. The way Jordan's predictability, once comforting, now felt like a cage. "We've been together since college. It's like we've forgotten how to surprise each other." Reese nodded, his expression thoughtful. Surprises keep the fire alive. Without them, everything turns to ash. The fire crackled, sending sparks upward like fleeting stars. Mia noticed the way Reese's hands moved when he spoke. Expressive, strong. A scar ran across his knuckles, white against tanned skin. "What happened there?" she asked, pointing. "Rock climbing accident," he replied. "Fell 20 feet. Broke a few bones, but it reminded me I'm alive." His eyes met hers, and for a moment the room felt smaller, the air thicker. Mia's pulse quickened, a flutter she hadn't felt in years. It was nothing, she told herself. Just the wine, the isolation, the storm brewing outside. But when Reese reached for the poker to stir the fire, his arm brushed hers, and she didn't pull away. The fog thickened overnight, turning the world outside into a white void. Mia couldn't sleep, tossing in the upstairs bedroom, her mind replaying their conversation. Reese had taken the couch downstairs, insisting it was fine. By morning, the power had flickered out, leaving the cottage in a dim, ethereal glow from the windows. Mia descended the stairs to find Reese brewing coffee over a portable stove he'd brought. "Morning," he said, handing her a mug. "Looks like we're stuck here for a bit. Roads are probably impassable." They spent the day exploring the nearby cliffs, bundled against the mist. Reese pointed out hidden coves and tide pools, his knowledge of the area turning the outing into an adventure. "See that rock formation?" he said, gesturing to a jagged outcrop. "Locals call it the Widow's Watch. Legend says a woman waited there for her sailor husband who never returned." Mia shivered, not just from the cold. As they walked, their hands brushed again, accidental, then not. Back at the cottage, they shared a simple meal of cheese, bread, and more wine. The conversation turned personal. Reese confessed he'd been through a messy divorce years ago. She wanted security. "I wanted the horizon." Mia spoke of Jordan's proposal, romantic on paper but lacking the spark she'd craved. As evening fell, the power still out, they lit more candles. The flames reflected in Reese's eyes, making them seem deeper, more inviting. "You deserve more than coasting, Mia," he said softly. The words were a spark. She leaned in, or perhaps he did, the distinction blurred. Their kiss was tentative at first, then urgent, fueled by the pent-up longing of lives lived in halves. The cottage, with its creaks and whispers, became their sanctuary. Hands explored, clothes shed in the flickering light, bodies entwining with a hunger that erased doubts. It was raw, passionate, a storm of its own making. Afterward, they lay tangled in blankets by the fire, breaths mingling. Mia's mind raced, guilt warred with exhilaration. "We can't," she whispered. Reese traced a finger along her arm. "We already did, but it doesn't have to define you. Sometimes it's just a moment to remind you what's possible." The next day, the fog lifted slightly, and Lena arrived oblivious to the undercurrents. Reese left with a casual goodbye, but his eyes lingered on Mia's, a silent promise or farewell, she couldn't tell. Back in the city, life resumed its rhythm. Jordan welcomed her with flowers and a hug that felt routine. "Missed you," he said. Mia smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Missed you too." Weeks turned to months. The memory of that night haunted her. Reese's touch, his words, the freedom in the fog. She found herself staring at the sea from her apartment window, wondering about horizons. One evening, Jordan noticed her distraction. "What's wrong?" he asked, concern etching his face. Mia hesitated, then shook her head. "Just thinking about change." He squeezed her hand. But it felt insufficient, a bandage on a deeper wound. Late one night, sorting through her bag from the trip, she found a small envelope Reese had slipped in. Inside was a photograph, the widow's watch at dawn, light breaking through the mist. On the back, in his scrawled handwriting, "Some watches end in return, others in new beginnings." Mia tucked it away, but the ache remained. The fog had cleared, but the storm within her raged on, whispering of paths untaken and desires unspoken. She lay beside Jordan, listening to his steady breathing, and wondered if safety was worth the silence. Outside, the city lights blurred like distant lighthouses, guiding her toward an uncertain shore. Mia stared at the photograph Reese had left her, the edges slightly curled from being tucked away in her bag for weeks. The widow's watch loomed in the image, its jagged rocks defiant against the breaking dawn, mist parting like a reluctant curtain. On the back, his words, "Some watches end in return, others in new beginnings." She traced the scrawl with her fingertip, as if the ink could somehow transmit the warmth of his touch from that fog-shrouded night. But all it did was stir the storm inside her, a whirlwind of guilt, longing, and self-doubt that had been raging since she drove away from the cottage. Back in the city, life with Jordan unfolded like a well-rehearsed play. Mornings began with the hum of the coffee maker, Jordan's predictable routine of scrolling through emails while she prepared breakfast. "Eggs or yogurt today?" he'd ask, his voice warm but absent, his eyes never quite meeting hers with the intensity she now craved. Mia would smile, murmur yogurt, and feel the weight of her secret press against her chest like an unspoken accusation. How could she sit across from him, sharing these mundane moments when her mind wandered back to the cottage? To Reese's hands on her skin, his whispered stories that made her feel alive, seen, desired in a way Jordan hadn't in years. The conflict gnawed at her relentlessly, a constant undercurrent beneath the surface of her days. Guilt was the sharpest blade. Guilt for betraying Jordan, the man who'd been her anchor through college graduations, job losses, and family holidays. He'd proposed on a sunset beach, ring in hand, promising forever with that boyish grin she once adored. "You're my safe harbor," he'd said, and she had believed it, clung to it through the gradual erosion of passion, telling herself that comfort was enough. But now, after Reese, that comfort felt like chains. Was she a monster for wanting more? For letting a stranger, a fleeting connection, expose the cracks in her foundation? Every time Jordan touched her, a casual hand on her shoulder, a goodnight kiss, she flinched inwardly, wondering if he could sense the residue of another's embrace. She replayed the night in her head, dissecting it like a puzzle, the brush of arms by the fire, the kiss that ignited like dry tinder, the way their bodies moved in urgent harmony. It wasn't just physical. It was the emotional rawness, the vulnerability she'd shared with Reese that she hadn't with Jordan in ages. "You deserve more than coasting," Reese had said. But did she? Or was she just selfish, chasing a thrill at the expense of a good man's heart? Doubt compounded the guilt, whispering insidious questions in quiet moments. Was the encounter with Reese real, or just a fantasy born of isolation and wine? The fog had made everything surreal, the cottage a bubble outside time where consequences felt distant. Back in the glare of city lights, reality crashed in. Jordan was reliable, kind, the kind of partner her friends envied. He planned date nights, remembered anniversaries, supported her career without jealousy. Their life was stable. A cozy apartment, shared friends, weekend brunches. Why risk it all for a memory? Mia would catch herself staring at her engagement ring, twisting it on her finger as if it were a noose. What if Reese was just a symptom of her own dissatisfaction, a projection of what she wished Jordan could be? She'd scroll through old photos on her phone, laughing with Jordan at a music festival, cuddled on a ski trip, and feel a pang of nostalgia mixed with sorrow. Those moments were real too, but they felt faded now, like sepia-toned relics. The internal tug-of-war left her exhausted. One voice urging her to confess, to shatter the illusion and rebuild. Another pleading for silence to preserve the peace she'd built. Longing was the most treacherous part, a quiet ache that bloomed unexpectedly. At work, designing logos and layouts, her mind would drift to the cliffs, the salt-tanged air, Reese's voice weaving tales of adventure. "I wanted the horizon," he'd said about his divorce, and those words echoed in her soul. Mia had always played it safe, choosing graphic design over her youthful dream of painting, settling into a relationship that promised security over sparks. Reese had awakened something dormant, a hunger for unpredictability, for passion that burned rather than smoldered. In bed at night, beside Jordan's sleeping form, she'd imagine alternative lives, packing a bag and chasing horizons, or confronting Jordan with her truths. But fantasy clashed with fear, fear of hurting him, of being alone, of regretting the upheaval. What if she left and found that the grass wasn't greener? What if Reese was just a catalyst, not a destination? She hadn't contacted him, his number wasn't even in her phone, but the temptation lingered, a what-if that haunted her dreams. Weeks stretched into months, and the conflict evolved, burrowing deeper. Mia started small changes, joining a yoga class for me time, suggesting spontaneous outings to Jordan. "Let's drive to the coast this weekend," she'd say, half hoping to recapture the magic, half terrified of what memories it might unearth. Jordan agreed, oblivious, and during the drive, she'd grip the wheel, her thoughts a maelstrom. At the beach, watching waves crash, she'd feel the pull of that night again, the freedom, the intensity. Back home, the note from Reese remained hidden in a drawer, a talisman she revisited in secret. New beginnings, it taunted. But beginnings meant endings, and Mia wasn't sure she had the strength to let go. One rainy evening, as thunder rumbled outside their apartment, echoing the storm at the cottage, Mia sat at the kitchen table, tears streaming silently. Jordan was in the living room watching a game, unaware. The internal war peaked, guilt for the betrayal, doubt about her worthiness for more, longing for the aliveness she'd tasted. She wiped her eyes, steeling herself. Tomorrow she'd talk to him, not confess everything perhaps, but start the conversation about their drift. Or maybe she'd burn the photo and bury the memory. The choice loomed, heavy as the fog that had once enveloped her. For now she folded the note away, the conflict unresolved, a storm that refused to break. But deep down, Mia knew, ignoring it wouldn't make it vanish. It would only grow, reshaping her from the inside until she either drowned or learned to swim.